Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Betty looked out of the cab window at the cityscapes running by and smiled. She was on her way home from the airport, her business trip unexpectedly postponed. The chief had called her boss, with whom Betty was already preparing to go through passport control, and informed her that there was no need to fly anywhere today. "Let's go home," Clara, the chief accountant of their company, ordered. "Today we rest. Tomorrow I'll see you at the office." Betty couldn't believe her sudden good fortune. A whole free day and Mason, just at home, took a vacation for a week, and daughter Molly flew with her parents to Miami. Finally, she and her husband would have some alone time. They needed it so badly. After all, lately both of them catastrophically do not have enough time for each other. But before it was different. Compliments, admiring glances, walks, romantic acts, surprises without reason, and talk about everything in the world. When did it change? With the birth of her daughter, or with Betty's going to work after a prolonged maternity leave? The woman couldn't remember the exact moment when Mason began to drift apart. It seemed to have been going on for about 3 years. Betty missed her spouse's jokes, attention, and care. She sincerely missed her formerly loving husband. The mere sight of him made a woman feel loved and attracted. Of course, Betty understood. Mason has a serious job. He often has to fly to Boston, where their company opened a large branch 4 years ago. He practically lives there, sometimes staying for weeks at a time, tired. It's understandable that he doesn't have time for romance. No, Mason honestly fulfilled all the duties of a husband and father, provided their family with everything they needed, spent his free time with his daughter, never gave up household chores. Yet Betty realized it was time for a change. She wanted that warmth back. This free day to spend alone with her husband was just the right thing to do. It would be good for their relationship, as if fate itself were helping them. Betty quietly opened the door with her key. She wanted the effect of surprise, to see her husband's surprised and delighted face. She tiptoed into the hallway. From their bedroom came Mason's quiet voice. He was on the phone, probably being disturbed from work again. He often received calls and texts, even at night, and on weekends or holidays, he could easily be called to the office or to the site. What can you do? He was an important person in a large construction company. But the paycheck was right. Betty was not the kind of wife who threw tantrums at her busy husband, demanding attention. She understood that her husband was trying for the sake of their family, even felt sorry for him, and was grateful to him for this work, and was proud of such a busy and irreplaceable husband. And now the woman did not interfere with Mason, lurked at the front door and decided to let him finish his conversation and then discover his arrival. But her husband's tone was strange, clearly non-businesslike. Betty involuntarily listened to the words. "Sweetheart, but I'll make a deal. They'll give you a few days of rest, come." Why would I pass up a chance like that? "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll buy you tickets, of course, but when else will it happen that my wife will go on a business trip for a week? She rarely goes on business trips, and then there's my daughter at the sea. Jenna, you wanted to see the Capitol. I'll give you a tour." Betty couldn't believe her ears. Is this really happening to her? Her husband is now cooing with some lady and even calling her over to their place while his wife is away on business. Mason has a mistress. Betty really wanted to explain the overheard conversation to herself in a different way, but her imagination was clearly lacking for a different version. And what else could she do to justify all this? Sunshine. "Come here. My wife's on a business trip." Mason almost cooed into the phone, speaking tenderly and affectionately. He hasn't spoken to his wife like that in a long time. Apparently, the unfamiliar Jenna had decided to come to New York after all. That's great. Mason was sincerely happy. I'll meet you at the airport. I have such plans. We'll have a great time. Yeah, whatever you want. Oh, you're so beautiful. I'm looking forward to it too. The conversation seemed to be coming to an end. Betty crept back to the door on shaky legs and slipped out onto the landing. She decided not to show Mason that she had heard him on the phone with someone named Jenna, a beauty by the looks of it. At least that's what he'd called her. Yes, Betty had no doubts about the superior looks of Mason's date. Her husband had always been an aesthete. The woman entered the apartment a second time. Now she purposely slammed the door loudly, signaling her presence. Mason stepped out into the hallway. Betty watched carefully as the confusion, surprise, and disappointment in his eyes was gradually replaced by amazed joy. Her husband had always been excellent at self-control. Now he quickly pulled himself together. If Betty had not heard this conversation, she would not have noticed that her arrival was not a happy news for her husband. "You're back," he smiled broadly. Mason was good at hiding his frustration at the lurking plans. "What kind of actor?" "Rescheduled a business trip," Betty replied. Her heart was pounding furiously, and her head was starting to hurt. "Were you upset about it?" Mason asked. "You're just not wearing your face. I felt sick in the cab." Betty lied. "I want to lie down." She went to the bedroom and, without undressing, fell in their big bed, trying not to think about the fact that perhaps her husband was planning to invite his mistress here. How could this be? They had been through so much together, had traveled so long and hard to build their prosperous, happy family, and had overcome all the difficulties together, shoulder to shoulder, always supporting each other, so many small and big victories behind them. Periodically, Betty would learn that the husband of one of her colleagues or friends had a mistress. Outraged and certain that it would definitely never happen in her family. And now this conversation. Her head ached, growing increasingly nauseous. Mason, seeing his wife lying pale and in a state of flux, was alarmed and brought her painkillers and a cold compress to her forehead. Had it not been for the overheard conversation, Betty would now be glad of such care. But then she wouldn't have been sick, either, because she'd been overexcited and her blood pressure had skyrocketed. Pressing her fingers to her temples so that the headache was easier to bear, Betty thought back to her and Mason's acquaintance. It had been a fun, carefree college time. The girl was relaxing in a club, in the company of classmates. There she had been noticed by him, a charming fellow with a wide, white-toothed smile, witty and cheerful, who could dance, unlike Betty herself. "What a handsome boy," Kelly remarked, a childhood friend. "Lucky you, don't miss out." And Betty? Yes, Mason was a prince, but right now she just wanted to have fun with her friends. She had no plans for romance, much less a serious relationship. Only recently Betty had hardly got rid of her ex-boyfriend, obsessive and constantly demanding attention. And now the girl was enjoying her freedom. The admiration in Mason's eyes was pleasing to Betty's ego. She liked his compliments and touches. He obviously hoped to continue communication outside the club, even took Betty's phone number. However, she had changed some numbers on purpose, as she often did. The girl did not plan a second meeting, so she tried to enjoy communication with a handsome guy here and now. And then their student company decided to go to another club, closer to the house where Betty lived. The girl said goodbye to her new acquaintance, who was upset by this news. Mason then gently took her narrow palm in his, kissed her hand gallantly, and said, "I'll call you back. I really liked you. You're so beautiful, so special. I won't let you go." Betty smiled. She felt like a real princess at that moment. The girl was always popular with the opposite sex. She had what is called a model appearance. Tall, slender, long-legged, her shiny brown hair falling below her shoulders, and emerald green eyes, regularly received admiring glances and compliments, and each time it was very gratifying. As she did now, Betty smiled sweetly at Mason, whom she thought she would never meet again. And she got into the overcrowded car of her classmates, where her friends were already waiting for her. The merry company drove through the night streets of her hometown for a long time. The students laughed, sang their favorite songs, made plans for the approaching summer, and Betty, to her surprise, couldn't stop thinking about Mason. It wasn't the first time she'd given a guy the wrong phone number, only now she regretted it for some reason. And she felt guilty about lying to her new acquaintance. The first person Betty saw when they pulled up to the club was Mason. It turned out he had taken a cab and followed their car and was now walking toward her smiling and open arms. The girl hurried toward the guy with joy and relief. How lucky was it that he had guessed to do this? She was afraid they would never meet again. With Mason, Betty had always been fun. He knew exactly how to cheer her up and make her laugh. Next to him, she felt safe from everything in the world and very loved. She realized that if she needed him, Mason would do everything possible and impossible for her. And it was very pleasant. And Mason had somehow gained authority among Betty's friends, which was very important to her. And this could not but make the girl proud of her for such a witty and communicative young man. He, like Betty, was a student, a third-year student, but he was studying at another university, an architectural and construction university, and was already working part-time for a friend of his father's. Betty, on the other hand, was fully immersed in her studies. Her parents offered her to enter the University of Economics to study accounting. The girl didn't mind. By the end of the 11th grade, she had no special preferences. An accountant, so an accountant. Vacancies will not be difficult to find later. Accountants are required everywhere. But Mason really loved everything about architecture and could talk about his work for hours. Betty loved to listen to his stories and look into the enthusiastic eyes of her favorite person. She had no doubt Mason would be a great success in life. In their 4th year, the couple decided to consummate their relationship. They were sure of their feelings for each other. "I've found my destiny. It's you," said Mason one day. "I want to be with you all the time, not date you a few times a week. I want to fall asleep and wake up next to you. So what if we're still students? I don't want to wait too long to get married." Betty was happy, smiling. She felt the same way. The prospect of becoming Mason's wife and always being by his side was breathtaking. But parents on both sides actively opposed the ideas of the young ones, motivated by quite logical facts. Both are still studying. On their feet did not become, there is nowhere to live. Where to hurry? Meet and get married later, when you've finished your studies and found a job. And then Betty thought of telling her parents that she was expecting a child. So her mom and dad and her future mother-in-law quickly organized a wedding. "That's a lie, of course," said Mason. "But what can you do if they need a good reason?" "It's their own fault," agreed Betty. "Well, what if it's true? What if we really have a baby?" Mason suggested, "I really want us to have a baby. I'm already working. We'll live in my grandmother's empty apartment. I'll finish university. I'll be made the head of the department at once. The chief has already promised me a place, so I'll feed us." "That's a great idea." Betty was happy. She suddenly realized that she really wanted a child from the man she loved. It would be the happiest and most beautiful baby in the world. But for some reason, the attempts of the young ones were not successful. The cherished pregnancy did not come. True, then this young married couple did not particularly care. And without that in life was a lot of interesting parties, friends, studies, traveling. When the newlyweds admitted to their parents that there was no child, they didn't even get angry. By that time, adults sincerely loved the second halves of their children and considered their decision to get married a correct and responsible step. They only laughed at the ingenuity of Betty and Mason and hoped that they would not delay their grandchildren. And then, finally, the diploma. Betty and her husband are now young professionals. Mason, as promised, was promoted to department head. Betty got a job as a bookkeeper at the mall. Now they were making their own money for a living. Not much, of course, yet, but their parents continued to help out as a matter of habit. So they had enough not only for food and utilities, but also for fun. "How good you are!" Callie, Betty's friend, admired her. "You've done so well in life." "I don't believe in fairy tales about early marriages falling apart, but I've been dumped by a guy again, and all I get are assholes." Betty sincerely pitied the woman who had failed in her personal life and thanked fate for sending her such a faithful, loving, reliable man as Mason. Her friends and coworkers were constantly complaining about their boyfriends and husbands. During these conversations, Betty felt a little awkward. She couldn't keep the conversation going, for she had nothing to reproach Mason with. Time passed. The newlyweds gradually managed to establish a household. Mason and Betty were homeschooled children, cared for by their parents, so household chores were a challenge for both of them at first. It turned out that Betty's long hair quickly clogs the drain, dishes do not wash themselves, dust in the corners accumulates incredibly quickly, and regularly ordered food in the restaurant hurts the family budget. The newlyweds were in for many such surprises. It got to the point that Betty, going to prepare dinner, typed in a search engine phrase, "Where can I get red water for borscht?" The couple withstood the test of everyday life with dignity. Both quickly enough learned to cook and clean, and even made repairs independently in the apartment. Their marriage was waiting for another test of durability. They were married for 5 years, and the family still had no children. Even Callie managed to give birth to a son. However, she raised her Ethan alone now. His father considered himself too young for such responsibility and disappeared in an unknown direction. But Betty was still almost envious of her friend, looking at her miracle, a tiny cute little baby boy, and desperately dreamed of her own baby. Mason, too, was eager to be a father. The hospitalizations began. Betty was diagnosed with serious reproductive problems. Medications, ultrasounds, tests, treatments. All this exhausts both mentally and physically, but for the sake of her dream, the girl did not give up. Mason was by her side and supported her spouse in everything. Probably, this is our punishment for lying to our parents then, as if we were expecting a child. Betty sighed sorrowfully, looking at another negative pregnancy test. "Come on, we meant well, and we didn't do anything wrong. And don't get upset, everything will work out." But it didn't. When all possible treatments had been tried, the doctor recommended echo. Betty and Mason were sure they would soon be parents, but 3 tries and no success. Betty lay on the bed and just stared at the ceiling. There was no more strength left to cry. She realized she was never going to be a mother. It was all useless, and she didn't want to torture her own body, to hope again and then be disappointed. And then Mason came up. "Shall we try again?" He said. "Only once. I read the forums. Some people only get it on the 8th, 9th try. We're on our 4th. Let's do it. 4th try, and that's it. If we fail again, we'll take a kid from the orphanage. Do you agree?" Betty jumped up on the bed. She once suggested her husband to look at orphan profiles, but he flatly refused. He wanted a child of his own blood. He didn't want to raise a stranger's son or daughter, but Betty didn't care. She dreamed of giving love and warmth to a tiny, defenseless human being, even if not born by her. This desire overshadowed all others, filled the woman's thoughts. Mason remained adamant. He argued about bad genetics, the difficulties of adaptation. He didn't want another man's child, and he had every right to. Betty accepted his opinion. So her husband offers to take the baby from the orphanage, but before that he asks for another chance at a native hare. Of course, this time Betty happily agreed to the echo. She was going to the procedure in a completely different mood. One way or another, soon her cherished dream will come true. She will become a mother. It is not known what played a major role, the new therapy or Betty's positive attitude. But it wasn't until this fourth time that everything worked out. Betty looked at the 2-strike test and cried with happiness. And soon Mason joined her. The pregnancy was difficult. Betty was often hospitalized. Mason completely took over the household and almost blew the dust off his wife. He honored her every request, anticipated her every wish, even asked her to quit her job. You don't need to go there now. Nerves unnecessary waste. Rest better, have a baby, grow up a little, and find you a new job. My salary is enough for everything, and next year I'll be promoted. Betty happily plunged into the life of a housewife. A beloved, loving husband, a cozy new apartment, and soon there will be a baby. What more do you need to be happy? Oh, Betty, you are a clever woman. You have organized your life so well. My friend Kelly, who often came to visit, said approvingly. Not like me, a single mother who is torn between work and my son. Ethan was already in 1st grade. Kelly did look tired, thin, anxious, always in a hurry. There's a reason I told you at the club. Don't let him get away. He's a great guy. Remember what I said? I do. Betty agreed. She texted Mason the wrong phone number that night, and if he hadn't followed them to the club, none of this would be happening now. It's scary to imagine. And then Molly was born. There was no limit to the happiness of the young parents and the newfound grandparents. Now their family became even stronger and happier. True, Betty, after a long treatment, difficult pregnancy, and childbirth, began to have problems with blood pressure. She often felt ill. Mason in these moments perfectly coped with the baby, bathed his daughter, fed her from a bottle, entertained the baby, even swaddled the newborn. And he was just as good at it as Betty. Molly grew up bright and active, but very sickly. She often caught colds and bronchitis in the garden, so Betty had to delay going to work. The maternity leave dragged on until her daughter was 5, and then Kelly invited her best friend to her firm. There was just a vacancy, so the women became colleagues. Life fell into place. Molly was already a 1st grader. Betty worked. Mason became the head of a large branch of his company, which was located in Boston. There were no money problems. Her husband provided for the family. Betty thought their relationship was perfect. Yes, there wasn't much romance anymore. Sometimes it was very lacking. But after all, they had been together for so many years, it was normal. The main thing was trust, reliability, mutual support. And now this conversation. Betty felt like she couldn't handle the pressure. It seemed to her that these health problems were in the past. Then after giving birth, Mason found the best doctors for her. The new mom got the right therapy, and she forgot about the headaches for years. But now such stress and they're back. By evening, Mason couldn't take it anymore and called his wife an ambulance. She was diagnosed with hypertension and taken to the hospital. She had to lie down for about a week. During that time, the woman pulled herself together. She has no right to beat herself up like that. She has a small daughter and a beloved husband. Yes, he made a mistake, but Betty doesn't know the situation. Maybe it's Jenna, the unknown Jenna, who has tricked him around. Betty is not going to give up just like that. She's been building her strong, happy family for a long time. She and Mason have done everything possible and impossible together. And now she's gonna give her husband to some skank? No way! That's the last thing we need. Molly needs a father. She needs a reliable, caring husband. Betty will fight for her family. This decision gave the woman strength and vigor. There was plenty of time at the hospital to get busy searching for the beautiful stranger. Betty only knew her name so far, but in the age of social media, that was enough. First of all, the woman set about monitoring her husband's accounts. Mason had a lot of friends and subscribers, colleagues, friends, partners, just acquaintances. Jenna among them was enough. Betty rejected ladies of age immediately. Then it was the turn of women who did not reach the aesthetic tastes of her husband. Mason always preferred beautiful, slender, well-groomed girls like Betty herself. The remaining Jenna beauties from her husband's pages were 3. These young women didn't look too suspicious, all of them showing off their own happy families on social media. Their profiles were littered with photos of their other halves. Who knows who they are, though? It's not a fact that Mason's mistress is single. How many cases when married ladies decide to have a little fun and make a friend on the side? And yet Betty's intuition told her that Jenna wasn't one of them. Suddenly, the search engine gave Betty several accounts with a note. Perhaps you two know each other. Among them was Liam, a colleague of Mason's from the Boston branch. In the main profile photo, he was clearly posing from a corporate event, with their company logo in the background. Betty was interested. Her husband had never shown her pictures from the parties he'd flown to Boston for. He said he wasn't interested in collecting that garbage, and he hated being photographed. And now Betty wanted to see how their corporate holidays were going. If Liam had put a photo from the party on the cover, he'd probably have a couple more on his profile. Betty went to the page of her husband's colleague, and as she expected, he had a whole album of photos from corporate parties. The woman started flipping through the photos with interest. She noticed her husband in some of them. He seemed to be deliberately hiding from the cameras, and the photographer managed to capture only a glimpse of him, in a half-turn or from the back. Betty smiled. Mason hadn't liked to be photographed since he was a child. His mother had told me a funny story about it, but it wasn't long before the woman wasn't laughing. The next photo featured the 3 of them, Liam, Mason, and a beautiful, bright young woman with chiseled facial features. Betty's husband stood in the center. The lady was clinging to him in an overly possessive way, and he was naturally and habitually putting his arm around her slim waist. Something wasn't right here. Betty shifted her eyes downward. Each of the characters in the photos were labeled Mason and Jenna. Jenna. Betty seemed to have accidentally stumbled upon the one she was looking for. The woman quickly navigated to the girl's page. There were many pictures of her. The beauty clearly loved being photographed. You bet, with such appearance, just a supermodel. Jenna at a resort. Jenna in a luxurious restaurant. Jenna in the pool, and everywhere alone. How could a hottie like Jenna be alone? She can't be. I bet she's got a lot of dates. And suddenly Betty saw a picture from the sea. It was obviously some foreign resort. White sand, bright sunshine, palm trees, turquoise waves. Jenna was photographing the beautiful landscape. In the frame, apparently, accidentally got a man. He stood with his back to the lens. But Betty recognized her husband, his figure, the birthmark on his neck, and the t-shirt that she herself gave him. There was no doubt. This was the same Jenna, her husband, had called to New York for her business trip. The same mistress. And they're serious. They're even traveling to the sea together. Mason must have explained those trips to her as business trips, of which he'd had too many lately. Well, at least now Betty knows the enemy. Jenna was in her final year of university when she met Mason. It happened in a bar where she and a classmate were celebrating the end of the session. A handsome young man in an expensive business suit was relaxing at a neighboring table with a few friends, or rather colleagues. Those two were dressed in strict jackets and pants. Businessmen, probably. Christina, Jenna's dorm roommate and classmate, looked at them. They're all so cool. Come on, they're old for us, and they're probably married. Just let me dream. So cool, well-groomed, not like our guys, continued to admire Christina. Having a couple of glasses of wine, she always became kinder to the opposite sex. Every man seemed to her almost a prince on a white horse. But the men in this nearby company did look attractive. Stylish, trim, handsome. One of them stood out in particular, gray-eyed, with a wide, white-toothed smile that made dimples appear on his cheeks. Jenna tried not to look in his direction. "Look, they're looking at us," Christina said admiringly. "Of course, you yourself do not take your eyes off them. So they look at you and are surprised. Calm down. Jenna, they are coming to us." Indeed, soon one of the men, not the one Jenna liked, came to their table. He introduced himself as Liam and asked Christina to dance with him. She gladly agreed. Jenna finished her cocktail and watched the dancing of her friend, who, apparently, decided to get closer to the beau by all means. But another man, the oldest of the group, with an expensive watch on his arm and stylish glasses, separated from the table. "Good evening." He introduced himself, taking a seat next to Jenna. "What is it that such a beautiful girl is sad here alone?" What a banal approach. From the representative of the older generation, Jenna expected something original. "I'm not sad about being alone. I'm enjoying it." The girl not too subtly hinted at being left alone, but the newfound admirer did not give up. "My name is James," he introduced himself. "I just can't resist your beauty. You look like a young Nicole Kidman. Has anyone ever told you that?" "More than once." "Can I ask you your name?" "No, you don't have to say no so flatly. You just don't realize you're missing out on a great opportunity I could give you. Give me some peace for starters." Jenna was getting annoyed. That Christina, she is there on the dance floor with her handsome man, and she has to fight off an obsessive suitor who does not understand neither hints nor direct refusals. James, meanwhile, had moved closer to Jenna, and he was drunk. That partly explained his lack of judgment. Surely in ordinary life, this man is tactful and intelligent. Some people shouldn't drink at all. They turn into such animals. James put his hand on the back of Jenna's chair and looked at the girl with admiring eyes. It was unpleasant. She stood up, intending to leave, but the man held her hand, his palm firmly around her wrist. "Where are you going? We haven't even met yet." "I have to go. I'll walk you out." James jumped up from his seat. He never let go of my hand. "Let me go already." Jenna shouted loudly. He didn't think to loosen his grip. Perhaps he couldn't hear or understand what he was saying, the cocktails playing no small part in his behavior. James, instead of letting go of Jenna, suddenly hugged her. It was too much. The girl moved as hard as she could at the insolent man, her elbow right into his soft belly, and he awed and opened his arms for a moment. The man's eyes flashed with malice. It frightened the girl. Anything could be expected from a drunken stranger. She tried to slip away, but he grabbed her again. This time roughly and very tightly. Jenna felt pain. "We need to talk. Sit down," James asked. "James, what are you doing?" "Calm down." The gray-eyed man approached them. Fortunately, he noticed what was going on at the table and rushed to help, either to rescue his friend from possible trouble or to protect the girl. For some reason, Jenna immediately felt safe and realized that everything was going to work out. Why would she? James' speech became more and more incoherent. Two other men from the company came up to them and took the clueless comrade to their table. "You excuse him." The gray-eyed one smiled. "I had a little too much to drink, and today the deal was closed, so here's a note." "Thank you," replied Jenna. She couldn't take her eyes off the man's beautiful, intelligent eyes. The girl just drowned in them. But another man, the oldest of the group, with an expensive watch on his arm and stylish glasses, separated from the table. "Good evening." He introduced himself, taking a seat next to Jenna. "What is it that such a beautiful girl is sad here alone?" What a banal approach. From the representative of the older generation, Jenna expected something. And Mason, Liam and Christina, who had been dancing, came to the table. "Come on, land here. Look how cool the girls are." Christina laughed foolishly with adoration, looking at her beau. Mason stayed at the table, and Jenna realized it was because of her. A hot wave ran through her whole body. She was drawn to Mason more and more, like a magnet pulling her. Mason was a very interesting and witty conversationalist. He seemed to be able to hold a conversation on any topic, and Jenna wanted to agree with his opinions every time. She wished the evening would never end. It was unlikely that she would ever meet this man who had such a strange influence on her again. From the table conversations, the girl realized that he lives and works in Boston and came here on a business trip. Mason, to Jenna's disappointment, did not even try to get her phone number. Most likely he is married, and he does not need a relationship on the side. Yes, the girl felt that she liked Mason, and it was very pleasant, but he behaved as restrained as possible, not showing his sympathy in any way. Jenna hoped that she did not give away her sudden feelings either. Until now, she hadn't understood what passion, love, and other concepts from romantic books and movies meant. It seemed to her that all of these were fictitious categories, that they didn't really exist, but now she was in a whirlpool of feelings, and she had no idea what to do with it all. The evening was rapidly drawing to a close. The bar closes at 200 hours. Christina and Liam decided to take a cab and go for a walk. They called Masana and Jenna, but the man refused at once, saying that he had an important meeting in the afternoon. Jenna thought of some reason not to go with the couple. When Christina and Liam drove off into the night, Mason offered to walk Jenna home. Her heart raced. Was what had been dreamed of all evening really happening? She'd really hit it off, and they'd start a relationship. Without witnesses, he would finally dare to take a step towards her. His heart fluttered in joyful anticipation. In the cab, the girl waited for Mason to kiss her, or at least to embrace her, but he again behaved a little aloofly, though he joked and smiled a lot. And already on the porch of the student dormitory, he took Jenna's phone number. She gladly dictated the numbers to him and realized that from that moment, she would live in anticipation of a call. It didn't take long to wait. Mason called the very next day, invited to the movie. After the movie, they walked along the waterfront, then stopped by a luxurious restaurant. Jenna had been living in Boston for 5 years, but she had no idea that there were such places here. She felt a little uncomfortable, but Mason helped her relax, just covered her hand with his palm, and all the anxiety, worry, awkwardness disappeared as if it had never happened. Then he offered to go to his place. Of course, Jenna knew what that meant, and Mason realized that she knew what she was getting into, so he didn't insist, gave her the right to choose. Jenna agreed without the slightest hesitation. The corporate apartment was as upscale and presentable as Mason himself, stylish, bright, spacious, modern, and clearly designed by a designer. Jenna didn't realize whether the company had bought the apartment for Mason or whether it was just renting it to an employee, because the latter was often in Boston. That's how they started dating. That first night, the couple was cozy on the couch in the living room. Mason suggested Jenna not to go to the hostel at night, but to stay with him. The girl gladly accepted the invitation. She did not want to part with Mason. And here they were watching some show on TV and eating rolls ordered from the restaurant, drinking insanely delicious champagne. Finally, the girl decided on an important question, which did not give her a rest. "And you, were you married?" she asked. "Yes, does it matter?" Jenna thought for a moment. On the one hand, it really didn't matter. She feels happy around Mason. She wants to see the face and smell the smell of the man she loves, to feel his touch and bathe in his admiration and care, and to be a part of his beautiful life. Yes, Jenna wasn't lying to herself. She liked that Mason was so successful and wealthy, but that wasn't the only thing that attracted her to him. Far from it. And the wife, she was somewhere far away, New York. What did it matter if she even existed or not? On the other hand, Jenna realized that it is not good to have an affair with a married man. It is always a betrayal, and the outcome is often sad, even tragic sometimes. The girl herself many times lectured her friend Christina when she was too fond of unfree men. And yet, still Mason attracted Jenna, charmed, mesmerized. For the sake of being near him, she was ready to go over all her principles and moral turmoil. After all, Jenna is not going to take him out of the family, at least not until she is enough to feel, at least sometimes as a woman, this strong, confident, and intelligent man. Mason has shown Jenna a very different life. The girl came to Boston to study from the village, and it took a long time to get used to the city. There was a time when she was even shy to go with her classmates to cheap cafes and eateries. In her village, she did not see anything like that. Such places seemed to her too luxurious. She felt in them some lost and ridiculous. Gradually, Jenna settled in Boston. It was easier and more fun to adapt with her roommate, Christina, a country girl like her. Looking at other students and following their advice, Jenna learned to dress and make up so as to favorably emphasize the advantages of her appearance. And movie halls, cafes, and bars soon stopped scaring her. Boys, students, and even teachers began to pay attention to Jenna. The girl realized the power of her beauty, but was not in a hurry to use it to the fullest, not like Christina, who seemed to try to take from her freshness and youth all at once. Jenna, however, having seen different stories in her village and in the city too, had made up her mind. First she would study, get on her feet, and then she would organize her personal life, surely with a worthy and successful man. They will have a wonderful family, a perfect one. Jenna will never again live in the poverty of her childhood, and she will not return to her village. On the contrary, she will bring her mother and brother here. The girl had global plans, and she confidently went to the goal. She studied at her pedagogical university, but she did not plan to work as a teacher of biology and geography. She thought that after graduation, she would find something more prestigious and highly paid. Entering this department right after school, the girl did not think much about the prospects. She went to the place where she had enough points, and the competition was small. And now Mason appeared in her life, and with him, Trips to restaurants, luxurious gifts, long conversations on interesting topics, vivid impressions, new acquaintances. Not even 2 months after the beginning of their relationship, as Mason offered Jenna to fly with him for a few days to Thailand, the girl with pleasure plunged into this beautiful sea fairy tale. Later, such trips became quite frequent. Mason could easily explain his absence to the family by business trips and business trips. Jenna, on the other hand, tried not to think about the fact that her man had another life, a wife and a daughter in New York. Of course, she almost immediately looked through her lover's social networks and saw pictures of his wife. Beautiful, successful woman, quite harmoniously looked in a pair with imposing Mason. Together they looked just perfect. Jenna could not help but recognize this fact, although it hurt her. The girl didn't plan to fall in love with Mason, or anyone at all. She had other goals for now, but she couldn't help it. Even yesterday, Jenna was an ordinary student who often had to eat instant noodles for dinner, even with Christina sometimes sharing this treat. She counted a small scholarship and saved on everything, and today she knew by sight the staff of the most elite establishments in Boston. She herself now lived in the very Mason corporate apartment that had so delighted her in a stylish studio, packed to the brim with tricked-out appliances, with a spacious bathtub. Jenna liked to lie in it with a flute of cold champagne, like the girls in the movies about the beautiful life. Mason flew to Boston every month, sometimes more than once. It was required by work issues, but Jenna suspected that his business trips became so frequent because of her too. The girl realized that Mason really took her very seriously, not as just another mistress. And he wasn't the type to change women like a glove. Jenna knew that this was Mason's first and only relationship on the side, and she could see that the man was very uncomfortable with the fact that he had to lie to his wife, but he couldn't give up on Jenna. When the girl graduated from the university, Mason got her a job in his branch in the Human Resources Department. Jenna had to learn a lot practically from scratch to master a new specialty, but she coped, and she liked the work very much. And the salary, almost every month coming with a solid bonus, and quite happy. The girl realized that without experience, right from the university bench, she would never have found a place with such a salary if not for Mason, and she was grateful to him for the opportunity to get on her feet. It was very important to her. Time passed in the company. Some of the employees, of course, began to speculate about the relationship between the branch manager and Jenna. They talked and got used to it. The girl cared little about it, but she realized that sooner or later some well-wisher would report everything to Mason's wife. And what would happen then? It was difficult to suppose, yet years passed, but everything remained the same. Perhaps the 1,000 miles separating New York and Betty was released from the hospital. She was now completely well, both physically and mentally. She realized that she would fight for the man she loved and for her family. This decision gave her strength and confidence, but Betty needed allies, no one but her faithful friend Kelly to tell her the details of the story. "What a mess," Kelly said thoughtfully after listening to Betty. The women were sitting in a coffee shop, not far from the office. It was the only place to get away from the ears of their co-workers. "Yes, these are pies. I never would have thought that about Mason, the perfect husband and father from the outside. The weird thing is, he's a really great husband and father. They've been together for 4 years, and I had no idea. With his schedule, it's no wonder, constantly on the road, it's easy to hide not just a mistress, but a second family. Well, what have you decided? How will you proceed?" "Fight for my husband," Betty replied confidently. "I want Mason to realize that I am worth more to him than he is, and that no young beauty is worth losing his family. I'd like to do it without Mason realizing that I know about his relationship. So you don't have a specific plan? Kelly clarified. What kind of plan? I don't have a lot of information. I only know her name and that she works at the Boston branch, which is probably where Mason put her. But I've seen pictures of her, and she's very pretty. So we need more information. Kelly concluded. Betty really liked it, us. She realized she now had a solid support in the person of her best friend. We do. Betty agreed, but where would she get that information? I don't know any of Mason's colleagues in Boston. I can't even ask them. I have an idea. Kelly suddenly had an idea. Really, what is it? Wait, I don't want to get your hopes up yet. I'll call you tonight. And her friend kept her promise. Indeed, called in the evening and outlined her simple, like all things brilliant plan. Kelly's brother had a friend who was an IT specialist. He helped Betty install a program that she could now use to control her husband's social networking and messenger accounts. If you don't know me, I don't know you. Half jokingly, half seriously, the young man warned. Betty could now see all of her husband's correspondence with family and friends, co-workers, partners, but most importantly with her, with the young blue-eyed Jenna who had intruded into their family. Of course, the woman felt some remorse because she had so treacherously invaded the personal space of the man she loved. But on the other hand, he had done far worse to her. Betty quickly realizes that things between Jenna and Mason are quite serious. She lives in his corporate apartment, cooking him delicious dinners there when Mason flies to Boston on business. Apparently, she tries very hard, specifically looking for exquisite recipes, not like Betty herself. Work and a child take so much energy and time, so she has recently had enough only for pasta and sausages, and the apartment is often not cleaned. However, Mason has never once expressed dissatisfaction with the domestic moments. On the contrary, when time allowed him, he took care of household chores without any indulgence, but maybe he still lacked care and attention, Betty. With the arrival of the long-awaited child, the woman did indeed spend much less time with her husband. Perhaps what happened was her fault. No, that's the wrong way to think about it. It's not easy for her either. But it's not like she went looking for a comforting lover. Mason and Jenna occasionally flew together for vacations. Betty realized this from the correspondence, in which there were phrases like "when we were in Italy" or "resorts by the warm sea." We've been many times before. I want to try something new. Maybe the Scandinavian countries? Sounds like they've traveled halfway around the world. That was a shame. Betty was sympathetic to her husband's busy schedule. Yes, they didn't spend much time together, but the woman believed that her husband was working for the good of their family. And now it turned out that many of these business trips were just a cover for traveling with Jenna. Reading the correspondence, Betty realized a lot. This girl is really in love with Mason, and him, Jenna gives him what her husband cannot get in the family. Passion, free time, vivid emotions, blind adoration. But if he was really ready to leave his wife for her, he would have done it already. Mason is clearly serious about Jenna, but apparently doesn't really love her. Except things can change. For example, the young mistress will give him a child, and then Mason will never leave them. Or anything else for that matter. Slowly Jenna can bind her man to herself, make him fall in love with himself. So she had to act decisively and as quickly as possible, but she couldn't come up with a plan. And Kelly couldn't offer any advice. I'm a single mom. What kind of counselor am I? She said, confused. Just know that if you need my help, I'm always here for you. Thank you. You've been so helpful. At least now I know the ins and outs of their relationship. What's it like? How does it feel to know your husband's not going on a business trip? But to her, it hurts. Betty admitted, but it's still better than being in the dark. Jenna had been thinking about starting her own business for a long time. She decided to try to open several dispensing centers of a popular online store. The girl thoroughly studied all the necessary information and made a business plan, but the accumulated funds were clearly not enough to start. Jenna was sure that Mason would gladly help her. He always supported all her endeavors and encouraged her development in any sphere. This time, too, Mason was pleased with the idea of a mistress. That's a wonderful idea. He praised it. And the direction is promising. With paperwork, if anything, I'll help. Only I do not have enough money. And Jenna voiced the missing amount, quite decent, but not astronomical for Mason. I can't take out so much at once. I'll fly to New York. You remind me, I'll transfer it. As it was agreed, Jenna sent Mason a text message with a reminder about the money transfer. Her lover never refused her anything. The girl was used to it, so she had no doubt that now she would get what she wanted. But the message about crediting the funds did not come, and time was running out. It was necessary to pay rent, advertising, utilities, and purchase racks for storage. So Jenna texted Mason again, to which she received a reply that he was looking into the matter. Eventually, Mason called and informed her in a frustrated voice that it wasn't going to work out. His family urgently needed money for something. Jenna did not get into the details. The man promised that he would definitely help her next month. The girl leaned back in her chair. Now she clearly felt second best. The family needed money, and Mason had chosen his wife in this situation, easily and without the slightest doubt. Next to him, Jenna was used to feeling superior to everyone else. Perhaps she was even in love with this self-perception, but now the girl fully saw the disadvantages of her status. She is only a mistress, not even entitled to take offense. Mason does so much for her as it is. Betty, of course, read a text message from Jenna in which the mistress reminded Mason that he promised to give her money for business development. That message both pleased and angered the woman. At the same time pleased by the fact that the girl apparently takes good advantage of her husband's opportunities. Mason cannot ignore this. He is far from being a fool. The easier it will be to convince him of the mercantile interest of the mistress, which against the background of sincere love and affection of his wife, will look especially ugly. And Betty was outraged that Jenna is too bossy with her husband's resources, and he, apparently, easily follows her lead. No way, Jenna. You're out of the family budget. That evening, Mason was late for work, and Betty had time to prepare a delicious dinner. Sitting at the table, her husband marveled at her culinary skills and praised the dishes. Better than a restaurant. Husband confessed. I'm glad you like it, smiled Betty. How was your day? The usual. It was fine. I've just had my Infiniti breakdown, Betty confessed. Infiniti? Mason was surprised. I just bought you a car a while ago. It's a good, reliable car. I'll send the mechanics over tomorrow. No need. I already took it to the service myself. It needs repair. Expensive. How much? And then Betty said an amount only a little less than what the mistress had asked. Mason stopped talking, thinking. Betty realized he was considering whether he could help both his wife and Jenna at the same time, and deciding who to sponsor first. A lot depended on his choice now, and his wife helped him make it. I need a car urgently. Molly has a competition soon. Training every day. I can't miss it. And I have to travel a lot for work every day. You know we have locations all over the city. Mason immediately transferred the necessary amount of money to Betty at the table. And then a little later the woman read a message from her husband, in which he justified himself to Jenna the mistress never received the promised funds. What pleased Betty most was the fact that Mason had chosen her over Jenna. After all, the mistress also had a good enough reason. She wanted to start her own business, and yet her husband had helped his wife. Jenna must have noticed that, and now she's suffering. Serves her right. Let her know her place. The money situation upset Jenna and even disappointed her, but she pulled herself together and life went on as usual. The following month, Mason did find the missing funds for her, and the girl started her business. She had a wise assistant and mentor in the person of her favorite man, so the experience was successful. Soon the invested money began to bring a good income. True, Jenna had more worries, but she even liked such business. She had no time and energy to think about her unenviable position as a mistress. She simply enjoyed Mason's presence in her life, his attention, his support, his patronage. She was still fascinated by his gray eyes, and she still melted at his touch as surely as she had on the first day of their acquaintance. Christmas was approaching, her favorite holiday since childhood. Jenna loved the scent of pine needles. She was mesmerized by the colorful lights, garlands. She was no longer a little girl, but as before, she associated the end of December with the expectation of a miracle, and this time the miracle really happened. Mason sent a text message asking her to buy a beautiful new swimsuit instead of an evening gown for the corporate party. He suggested we fly together to the Arab Emirates on New Year's Eve weekend. Getting away for a few days from the hustle and bustle that always accompanies the end of the year sounded delightful. Of course, Jenna replied that she gladly accepted the offer and went to the mall that same day. She wanted to look flawless for Mason on this vacation. Jenna liked to see his rapturous gaze, to hear the compliments she received. So she picked up a beach closet, maximally emphasizing the numerous advantages of her appearance. The girl was sure that not only Mason will admire her on the beach, let her lover see what success his girl enjoys with others. Jenna had read somewhere that it greatly increases the value of the chosen one in the eyes of men. The girl was already anticipating how they would splash in the warm waters of the Persian Gulf and rock out at the local discos, and then rest in the luxurious apartments of the hotel. The trip promised to be wonderful. Jenna tried to behave with restraint, but in the end she could not resist the handsome student from England. He was 3 years younger than her and seemed to have a real crush on the American girl. Although Jenna immediately told him that their romance was purely resort for only a few days. The young man made her feel needed and admirable again, but Jenna realized that neither he nor anyone else could replace Mason. The pre-holiday weekend flew by like a blink of an eye. It was time to go home. Jenna realized that she missed Mason very much and was ready to forgive him anything. Although, of course, as they say, the resentment was gone, but the residue remained. Betty felt like a winner again. They just had a wonderful couple of days at the base, skiing and tubing, walking through the winter forest, roasting meat, drinking spicy mulled wine, playing board games in a big and friendly group. We laughed a lot and talked about interesting topics. Betty listened to a lot of thanks for the fact that she had guessed to bring everyone together and organize this trip. Most importantly, they were together at this time, Betty, Mason, Molly. There was no rushing or hurrying anywhere. Fully enjoying each other's company and hugging and laughing all the time. Betty decided that they needed to do this kind of outing more often. All of this was clearly good for their relationship. At first, Mason seemed anxious and lost. Apparently, he couldn't stop thinking about the lonely Jenna, but then he relaxed, calmed down, and began to enjoy the winter vacation. And the mistress flew to Dubai with a friend. That was wonderful. Betty sincerely hoped that she would meet some rich man there and not return to the USA. Why? Jenna is a blue-eyed blonde, a real beauty, so this option is quite possible. But as much as Betty didn't want it, the problem didn't solve itself. Jenna came back and immediately started texting Mason about how much she missed him. That was okay. Betty wasn't going to give up. Jenna had a favorite little brother. She'd raised him since he was a baby, helping his busy, tired mother. Now David was all grown up, 18 years old. Time has flown by quickly. From a cute, blonde-haired little kid, he turned into a handsome young man. He entered a sports college and was given a dormitory. Charles began his student life, of course. He often came to his sister. She was always happy to invite her relative and even helped him with money. But the young man wanted to earn money himself. "I'm looking for a job," one day he confessed to Jenna. "They promised to take me as a courier in the delivery service. You'll be in the snow and in the cold to travel around the city with a huge box on your shoulders." My sister shook her head. "And get change for it. You don't even have a car, so you should at least drive it. Otherwise, you'll be walking and taking buses." But what can I do? For now, we'll see. Everyone works somehow. Everyone? Jenna frowned. It's different for everyone. And the older sister reminded her brother of a story that had recently happened in their town. A courier, a young girl, brought an order to an apartment and fell into the clutches of drunken guys. The girl miraculously survived the encounter with the scumbags. But it was a girl. I'm a man. David brushed it off. What's the comparison? You think because you're a guy, you're safe? Well, sort of. David smiled. Come on, you're getting a little shady around town. It used to be quieter. All right, I'll talk to someone. Maybe I can get you a job driving for our firm. There's probably plenty of applicants. Your salaries are good. Yes, there are a lot of applicants. Agreed Jenna. But not every one of them has a sister working in the personnel department. Of course, the girl immediately wrote to Mason. In their branch, there was indeed a vacancy for a driver to unload materials. As a member of the Human Resources Department, Jenna could not help but know about it. The work is not much, the pay is good. David would be able to combine study and work perfectly and would not need money. Mason replied that he would take care of the matter. Jenna was sure that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, she would register her brother for a vacant position. Betty read the post about the vacancy and wondered. Another request that could be used in the struggle for marital happiness. The mistress would again be left with nothing. The woman suddenly remembered that she had a nephew living in Boston, so she dialed the number of a great aunt, his mother. It turned out that the nephew works at a local factory, works hard, and gets change. The situation was perfect. Betty happily told her aunt about the job opening and promised to talk to her husband. How did you know the Boston branch needed a driver? Mason looked at his wife in surprise. She had just asked him to hire her great-nephew for the job, describing beforehand how important the relationship with those relatives was to her and how she wanted to help them. I happened to run into Kathy, your boss's wife, at the mall. Mason wondered how bad the timing of all this was. After all, he'd promised a spot to Jenna's brother. She's gonna be upset again, but we already found someone. Mason, I called Human Resources. The position is still vacant. Say no to that person. Say it's taken. Do you have any idea what my aunt did for me? I just have to pay her back. A good job for her son is what's needed. Oh, please, for my sake. Mason heartily texted Jenna to tell her that he couldn't take her brother's job. Of course, the girl was upset. Resentment squeezed her heart. She even threw a plate on the floor in a fit of anger. Again, she was sidetracked. and the next day the new driver added fuel to the fire. A radiant young man came to apply for a job. He happily shared that he had been told about the position by his great-aunt from New York, the wife of the Boston branch manager Mason. So once again Betty, without realizing it herself, had screwed things up. Jenna felt herself slowly beginning to hate the woman. She was the reason Mason repeatedly rejected her requests, and he was becoming more and more frustrating. It seemed that Mason was gradually burning out. Their protracted relationship was becoming more and more like a habit. Jenna was very sad to realize it, because the girl still wanted to be near him, to hear his voice, to see attentive gray eyes, and yet the girl realized more and more clearly that their romance would lead to nothing. She had realized it from the beginning, but then passion overshadowed all rational thoughts. Jenna felt herself next to Mason exceptional and unique. He seemed willing to do anything for her. Mason really did a lot for Jenna, but lately his attention was clearly not enough for her. He was always dealing with family problems, working a lot. It was so humiliating to be on the sidelines, especially with so many available men around who would be happy to be near her. "Come visit me this weekend. I miss you so much," asked Jenna. Mason hadn't been in Boston in over a month. "Baby, I can't. There's a lot of work at the head office. Maybe it's the wife again." Mason sighed. He must have loved Jenna in his own way. He sure did. Why else couldn't he break off a relationship that had grown too serious? He liked a lot of things about her. Good looks, determination, wisdom. Despite her youth, Jenna was remarkably adequate. She never threw tantrums, never drove him crazy. Mason was sure that she would not get pregnant in order to marry him, and would not call Betty with offers to leave her husband. But lately, Jenna has been a little too jealous of his wife. Yes, indeed, there have been several incidents in which Mason has shown that family is more important to him than anything else, but he's never hidden that from Jenna. He admitted on their first date that he wasn't single, and several times during their time together, the man was ready to let her go when she wanted to leave. But Jenna had always come back, and Mason had been genuinely happy about it. He'd probably gotten used to having her around by now. Beautiful, in love, not too demanding, understanding. It was a shame that her behavior was changing. But maybe it's just some crisis in the relationship. It's necessary to be patient a little, and everything will be back to normal. Jenna sat with a glass of champagne in a bubble bath. Being a village girl from a poor family, she never dreamed of such a life. A high-paying job, luxurious interiors, her own small business, a beautiful car, and a man she loved. True, things were not so smooth with the man. He belonged to another, and lately it was indicated more and more often and more vividly. Just at one moment, everything went wrong, as if someone upstairs decided that Jenna had enough personal happiness. Mason's not coming again, citing work, but it's probably all about family. I wonder if she needed help. Would he give up his wife, his kid, his office to support her? I'd have to see if he'd lie. But it's a test, and the future of their relationship depends on how Mason reacts. If he drops everything and flies to her, they'll be together. No. Jenna will pack her things and go to her mother's village for a few months, quit her job. Mason will be there. The business will be entrusted to Christina for the time being. She's her right-hand woman now. Her friend's in the loop. She'll be fine without her. And Jenna will get over her illness, cry and go back to being free. But that's plan B. The girl still hoped Mason would rush to her like he used to. Maybe in time he would even leave his wife, and they would build a family of their own. The phone clicked with a special beep, meaning Mason had a message from Jenna. Betty quickly read it. Okay, that makes sense. New request. The mistress is complaining to her husband about feeling awful vascular problems and wild headaches. I can't do anything. Probably have to go to the hospital. I need help with my business and personal support from my loved one. Betty thought about it. Her intuition told her it was a lie. Jenna is a young girl in the prime of life. The woman had seen the recent pictures she had sent her husband on a regular basis. In them, Jenna was strikingly fresh. Clean, radiant skin, light blush, bright eyes. Looking at the pictures, Betty thought that youth was still beautiful in itself. The girl clearly didn't look sick. Of course, all sorts of things happen. Her hypertensive crisis came on suddenly. But even if Jenna was really sick, let her heal herself. She was not a little girl. Mason took her to a high-paying position, helped her to establish a business, so the money for treatment at Madam clearly has, and care and attention let and demand from close relatives. No, Betty will not let her husband go to Boston anytime soon. Except that she has to come up with a reason, but she'll manage. Lately, Betty felt like she was just a generator of ideas. It didn't take long to think of one. When Betty was picking up her daughter from figure skating practice, she noticed a colorful poster on the wall of the sports center. A grand performance of the section's pupils at the big stadium was planned. The show promised to be bright and colorful. Betty approached Coach Molly. "Hello, why isn't my daughter in the show?" "Molly's not ready yet. She has great prospects. Next year she will definitely show herself, but right now. Perhaps she needs extra lessons? I'm ready to pay for them, as long as my daughter gets to this concert. You see, we have elderly relatives visiting us. This may be the last time they come to New York. If they could see Molly, it would make them happy." "I understand, but does your section need new equipment? If you put Molly on the program, I'll get it for you." All right. With apparent reluctance, the coach agreed. Only Molly will have a cameo. She is still small, and it doesn't matter. Betty shined. The main thing is that Molly will perform. At dinner, Mason said that the day after tomorrow, he would be flying to Boston to solve some work issues. Couldn't the business trip be rescheduled? Betty pretended to be surprised and upset by the news. "Why? Something urgent again?" "I wanted to tell you such happy news. Our Molly has been accepted to perform at the Ice Palace. She's the smallest person in the show. Can you believe it?" Mason looked proudly at his daughter sitting next to him. "You're doing great. You're the star of the ice." "Yes." Molly lowered her eyes modestly. "I'm good. I've worked so hard, and now I'm going to perform. You're coming to watch, right, Daddy?" Mason looked into his daughter's hopeful eyes. The man's choice was obvious. Jenna would soon receive another rejection. Another Betty-directed situation that should contribute to the destruction of the relationship, mistress and husband. Jenna was packing her things. She did not want to leave her apartment, which for 4 years had become almost native, but the girl was determined. This time she is definitely leaving Mason. He has shown her time and time again that family is more important to him. Jenna will always be in second place for him, even perhaps in third place. Then there's the job she adores. She's already bought the train tickets at the office. She herself has drawn up an order for her dismissal. The story's over. Jenna realized that she wanted to be the only one for her man. Perhaps it was time to start a family of her own. Christina recently got married and is now expecting a son. Looking at the family happiness, friends, Jenna realized that she dreams of the same, but a husband and a child. All of this is unthinkable while she's in a relationship with Mason. It was time to put a stop to it. Jenna no longer resented Mason, only the pain of knowing he loved another woman. The man had done so much for her. The girl felt grateful to him, and she would be sure to tell him that to his face or over the phone. But later, not now. Now it is necessary to wait it out, to get over it, to hide for a while. And then a new life would begin. Mason watched Molly's performance. He had come to the Ice Palace with a tricked-out professional camera. Betty watched as he tried to catch his daughter in the frame, not often succeeding. Just as the coach had warned, Molly flashed in the back rows, but the proud father didn't seem to notice. His eyes burned with genuine admiration for his child. Next to him lay a bouquet of roses prepared for the little star. Then the phone beeped again, the same beep that had alerted him to messages from Jenna. Mason didn't pay attention to the sound. He was completely absorbed in his daughter's performance, and Betty, of course, immediately read the text message and smiled victoriously. Jenna asked him not to look for her. She said it was over between them. She even quit her job at the Mason branch so she wouldn't have to see him. Sounds like a win to me. Although, of course, it's too soon to relax. Mason, back in his empty Boston apartment, felt an acute sense of guilt. Taken 4 years of Jenna's life. She could have met her destiny, gotten married, had children instead of wasting her youth on a futile relationship. His conscience was soothed only by the fact that he still helped this girl to establish a business and become financially independent. But the sadness and regret that he and Jenna were not together now, strangely enough, was not there. On the contrary, the man even felt relieved. Now he wouldn't have to flit between his wife and his mistress, trying to pay attention to both. There would no longer be that oppressive feeling of guilt in front of Jenna and Betty. The situation had resolved itself. Lucky. Betty was celebrating the victory with her best friend Kelly. The women were sitting at a pizza place near their office. It was lunch hour. Good for you. Kelly praised the woman. She overcame her resentment, was able to forgive the man she loved, and kept her family together. She pulled it off so masterfully, and it's like she had nothing to do with it. Yes, I'm a strategist, it turns out. Betty agreed. Mason, I think, has come to value family even more. At least he's trying to make time for us. But, Mason's already had an affair. I don't want to scare you, but it's almost certain to happen again if he's capable of it. What are you gonna do then? Well, Betty set her glass down on the table. A cold determination appeared in her gaze. Well, in that case, I already know exactly what to do.